Welcome to the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for a 45-minute in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, here's your host, Jessica, with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology podcast. It's great to have you on our podcast as part of the Blogging for Jobs and Recruiters Lounge blog family. In 2014, Facebook has amassed over 1.3 billion, that's billion with a B, users. Users at the social networking site spend on average 21 minutes a day liking, posting, updating, and sharing photos and videos. Facebook recently announced that they will be launching an enterprise version of their social network called Facebook for Work. If you're like me, you're probably spending a lot of time on social media, particularly Facebook. In fact, it's the first thing I do, even before I get up out of my bed every morning. My guest today is Aaliyah Wright. She's someone who knows about the perils and benefits of social networks, including Facebook, in the workplace. Welcome to the show, Aaliyah. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much for having me. I do appreciate it, and it's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little about you and your background.
Well, I'll start at the beginning. I'm a journalist, and I write for SHRM Online and HR Magazine. I've been a reporter and editor for more than 15 years. I came to SHRM from USA Today headquarters in Virginia, where I was the entertainment editor of Gannett News Service, and I was managing their entertainment coverage for all of their newspapers, including the nation's largest daily, USA Today. And before that, I was a political correspondent with the Associated Press in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from.
Cool.
So last year, I wrote a bestseller for my company about social media usage in the workplace, and I travel the world now speaking to HR professionals about embracing social media and innovations in social media recruiting.
And you told me as we were preparing to hit the record button that you are heading to Savannah, Georgia later this week to give a talk about social networks to, did you say legal assistants?
These are state court administrators.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so it's not just HR professionals or CEOs who are needing help with understanding social media.
It's anyone who's managing employees in the workplace. So in different environments, they call them different things. So it's still people who are people managers.
Very cool. And as I mentioned, today's topic is about social networking, particularly Facebook. And as Aaliyah mentioned, she has authored a book. It's titled A Necessary Evil, Managing Employee Activity on Facebook, LinkedIn, and the hundreds of other social media sites. So I want to get going because I know this is going to be a popular topic. Everybody has questions about social networks. Why are they important? How should we be still using them? Should we allow our employees access? So I wanted to ask you, because I get this question a lot, how are employees using or abusing social networks during work hours?
Well, many are using it the same way most of us are, and we use it to check in with friends, confirm plans for later with our friends and loved ones, or offering their opinions and discussing current events. But some are also using it for work purposes to pose questions and find information. It's not just a social network, it's a search engine too. So as for abuse, I think that if companies are noticing their employees' productivity has declined, then they need to manage that employee, find out what's going on. And if it's an issue with the person spending too much time on any website on the internet, and that's any website, social media included, they need to, instead of doing their job, then it's time for management to step in and address it.
And I think that you're absolutely right. And what has been interesting in my experience is over the years, as I have been on Twitter and Facebook and blogging and all these other places, as initially the reaction was to just completely block access. And that isn't always the best solution to the problem, particularly when you have a mobile device. What are some other ways that companies can manage social media use during work time?
Perhaps the best way to manage social media use at work is to make sure you have a social media policy and to train your employees on the policy. Have conversations with them about social media and what your expectations are for them when they're at work in your company. But in crafting that policy, and I know we're going to talk about this a little more in detail, you must make certain that you're not overreaching. The National Labor Relations Act states that companies cannot infringe on employees' rights to discuss their working conditions. It's called protected concerted activity, and employees can discuss those conditions in whatever language they deem fit, provided two or more of them are having those conversations. The test hasn't been made yet when one employee gripes on Facebook and no one chimes in and the employer finds out. But in that case, I urge employers to have discussions with their employees about their concerns so it doesn't escalate online. So I think that policy and then having a strategy about how you're going to approach your social media use at work is important.
So let's talk a little bit more about social media policy, because I feel like that's a good starting point for a lot of companies who are maybe aware that their employees are using social networks, whether at work or during off hours. What other advice can you give for companies or HR teams for creating or maybe even updating their social media policy?
Okay, so what you want to do first is make sure you tap different divisions when you're composing your policy. So have marketing, public affairs, HR, legal weigh in. It's not a bad idea to have social media committee comprised of those individuals in case something happens. And above all else, you need to know exactly how you're going to respond in case something bad happens and if it goes viral. If an employee misbehaves, and there are dozens of examples, tell employees what the repercussions will be and apologize to the persons or persons who were offended. Let your audience know what actions, if any, was taken. Some companies have not fired people for making mistakes on social networking sites. Others have, but you want to get in front of those gafes before they go viral. What makes up a good policy? Well, before you delve into policy, you should first determine the strategy, like I said. Are you going to be the social media police? You shouldn't. But you figure out what you're going to do in case you have issues with social media use at work before you have issues with social media use at work. Then you develop the policy and train it, and you train employees on it. So Walmart has a good social media policy, and it's been blessed by the National Labor Relations Board. You can Google it. Essentially, it states, don't do anything that breaks the law, be polite and courteous, even if you disagree, stay on topic, keep conversations relevant, avoid fictitious personas. They have a different policy for Twitter, of course, but that was some of the elements within their Facebook policy. You want to make sure employees know whom to get proper permissions from before giving out company information, and make sure you disclose to followers that you are an employee and your opinions don't represent endorsements. So those are some of the elements that can be in a social media policy. But for further and a deeper dive, I do encourage people to go take a look at Walmart's social media policy, because it's one that's, like I said, has been blessed by the National Labor Relations Board. You won't get in trouble if you use that as your template.
And we'll go ahead and link to Walmart's policy, so you'll be able to have that if you go to bloggingforjobs.com and just search for Aaliyah Wright. You'll be able to get that information and then be able to access those examples. I wanted to talk about something and go a little bit off topic, because it's been in the news as of this week, and there are a number of different stories in the media, it seems like every day, of people who have made mistakes on social media that have cost people their job. And there's one that has actually occurred this week. There's a congressional staffer who posted on Facebook some really critical comments about President Obama's children. And so she's actually resigned. What are some maybe suggestions that you can provide companies? Because obviously this post was made on her personal Facebook page. What are some steps that companies can go to make sure that this doesn't happen, or if it does, how to kind of maybe just lower the risk or the negative exposure that company might receive?
Well, in developing your social media policy, one thing you want to do is you can't tell people what to post, obviously. People have a right to their opinions and a right to say whatever they want to say. We live in a free country. However, if you're sharing something that's controversial online, just remember that anything you share has, there's always a possibility that the people you intend to see it will share it with other people that you don't. I don't know if her Facebook page was public or not when she shared this information, but whether it was or not is moot, because what she does for a living as a communications director, she probably should have been more judicious in what she decided to share. I tell people all the time, if you're going to post something, just think before you click. just because you're never sure who's going to see something that you may share. Sometimes we have opinions about things that may not meet what other people think are good. But we like I said, we are entitled to have our own opinions. But sometimes you want to have those conversations, maybe with your friends at the dining room table, maybe in a text message that only one or two other people can see. These are things that you may not want to post on a billboard for all the world to see, because that's what you're doing when you're sharing something on a social networking site.
Sometimes offline is the best thing, certainly, and even text messages. I mean, those things can be screenshotted and posted on a Tumblr page and go viral in a matter of minutes. We're just living in a different time than we ever have before.
That's true, but I would tend to think that if I'm sharing a text message with a friend, a close personal friend, and I'm voicing my opinion, that they're not going to spread it. At least I would hope. But at the same time, the thing about social networking is we're the privacy settings sometimes lure us into a false sense of security, where we don't realize that anything you share online can be printed out, screenshotted. People hold up the phone and say, hey, take a look at this. It can be seen by anyone. How private is private if you're sharing with 250 people? It's not very private. So you have to remember that some people that you share things with, they will reshare those things. I've seen it time and time again in many, many different circumstances. There was one last year where a woman who worked for a company that did public relations for Match.com, OkCupid.com, and Black People Meet, she sent out a tweet about going to South Africa and, the fact that she was white and, she hoped that she didn't get AIDS. And it was very offensive. And she only shared that with her friends on Twitter, but it went viral anyway. And it went viral right before she got on a plane. So she was in the air for a dozen hours while this thing went round and round the internet. And by the time she got off the plane, she had no more job. And she was a director of public relations for her company. But the thing is that you're not sharing things in a vacuum. You have to be mindful. And I think, too, that if employers use these bad examples, they can go a long way in encouraging employees to think before they click.
I think before you click is such an important thing to consider. And I will mention also that Facebook is updating their privacy settings. So if you're listening to this podcast, maybe go to your Facebook. There should be a little announcement. We'll put the link in for you with some additional information from Facebook on bloggingforjobs.com when we publish this podcast. But it's important for you to understand security and privacy and the changes that are obviously happening all the time. I'm a huge proponent of social networks when used responsibly in the workplace. And I recommend that employers go beyond the standard social media policies we've been talking about and invest in employee training on social media use and best practices. What type of trends are you seeing when it comes around social networks in the workplace? Are companies still moving to ban access, or are they kind of going beyond and looking at training and sort of helping employees understand the good as well as the bad, kind of some of the things that we've been talking about?
So I have a lot of statistics for you. So Proskauer, a global law firm, reported recently that 36% of companies ban employees from using social media. Part of the reason people still block it is because they're afraid of it. You can't control social media. The message comes from all different kinds of directions, and people often, like I said, don't think before they click. But that's not a good enough reason to ban social media or to be afraid of it. You have to understand this. Social media use is now a competency for HR professionals, especially recruiters. You have to understand it. Now, 74% of online adults use social media and 40% deploy them from their smartphones. So people are going to use it if you block them anyway. Certainly, people have embraced LinkedIn. There are 332 million people on the site, and 2 people join it every second. In the last quarter, they earned $568 million. But now we may see more companies embrace social media at work, particularly with enterprise social networks, and especially if Facebook at Work comes to fruition. People are becoming more open to it, and that's directly correlated to the fact that we have more millennials entering the workplace. Now, these millennials, they are digital natives, and they spend 81% of their time on Facebook. And companies are realizing it costs on average about $24,000 to replace them. So, they're between 18 and 33 now, and they're among the best educated young adults in history. A third of them have bachelor's degrees or higher. 56% won't take a job that bans them from using social networking. 89% prefer flexibility, and 45 prefer that flexibility over pay. The thing to understand about millennials is they will be roughly 50% of the US workforce in 5 years by 2020, and 75% of the global workforce by 2030. The way they use social media in college and their personal lives will be the way they expect to work. And it may not matter because in 5 years, they'll make up most of the workplace. So keep in mind, too, that right now, 63% of U.S. executives will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years. And in the last five, 87% of millennial workers became managers compared to 38% of Gen Xers and just 19% of baby boomers. So like I said, the workplace is changing because we're talking about a whole new generation of workers who are going to use these tools, who are using these tools in school now, and they'll think nothing of using them at work.
It's commonplace for them, right? I mean, they've been using them every day and it's been acceptable. They text with their friends, they text with their parents. Personally, I prefer a text to voicemail. That's just me. And so using social media, mobile, and these other communications is commonplace.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. There was a study that came out. Not a study, I'm sorry. I saw this report on television. And there's this company in New York that's actually teaching people how to leave voicemail messages because millennials, they're so used to texting each other, they get uncomfortable with using their voices to speak on messaging. Can you imagine that, being afraid to leave a voicemail message or having to be trained on that? The other thing, too, is I have a 14-year-old son, and he's in a film class right now. And so part of one of his assignments was to demonstrate blocking and set direction and some other camera terms. And so in order to do this assignment, he and another student had to film themselves doing this, demonstrating how they were doing these set descriptions. And they had to make a video and put it on YouTube in order to turn the assignment in for credit. And this is their work assignment. He's in the 9th grade. So this is how they're teaching our kids in school now with these tools. And so for them, this will be second nature. So when they come from school and they enter the workplace, they're expecting to be able to use the tools that they've been using in grade school or in some cases in college. So it behooves employers to just get with the times. This is how we communicate now. There's no going back.
Can you imagine a employer, and I'm sure that it's happened, but let's just say I'm an employee and I needed to create a tutorial video, maybe how to accomplish a task or do some keyboard strokes or a certain shortcut in Excel. And it would make sense that I would shoot the video and upload it to YouTube and share it with my colleagues so I wouldn't have to have the same conversation over and over again. This is the reality that we're living in. And I think it's important for employers to understand and have plans to mitigate these situations because it's untested waters.
This is the way we're moving. This is the future of work. And in many cases, it's here right now.
You mentioned an important point. I just want to kind of reiterate when you're talking about the expectation of these millennials for access to social networks, for flexibility. There was a interesting article, which we'll link to here in the podcast, from the Wall Street Journal that says that at present, the average time to hire is 58.1 days. And so when we put up these barriers to social networks and aren't providing maybe work flexibility and other things to our best in class workers, whether it's millennials, Xers, or boomers, we are increasing the time to hire. And as you mentioned, it costs $24,000 to replace an employee. Let's add on the fact that it's taking almost 2 months to be able to replace that person.
A lot of time.
It is. And it's only going to increase. And unemployment right now is at extremely low levels, and it's crazy. I mean, it's a job seekers market right now. Let's talk a little bit more about your book titled A Necessary Evil: Managing Employee Activity on Facebook, LinkedIn, and the hundreds of other social media sites. It's
a mouthful, I know.
It is a mouthful, but it is hundreds, maybe even thousands of other social media sites. They seem to be popping up every single day. What advice do you have for employers who maybe are just dipping their toes into social media or just learning how employees are using it at work or during their off time?
So lurk, listen, and then jump in slowly. So you can follow the 99-1 rule, which I first heard from Ben Brooks. He states that 90% of people lurk. Basically, they read everything. They look at photos, they look at the wall, and then they log off without commenting. 9% are passive contributors. They'll like stuff and read, basically. Only 1% are actually generating content, making videos, sharing links, blogging, etc. Very few are generating content, the people who are lurkers, of course. And so lurkers are learners, which is what he says. And it's not a bad thing. So consider your own Facebook fan page or the groups you may belong to. You can see how many people see your posts. Just because people don't say anything doesn't mean they're not interacting with your content at all. So just start slowly and take some advice from the people who you are watching and who you're interacting with on social networking sites. Many people joined Facebook because their kids were on it, or they wanted to bump into long lost college friends, or because a family member went on. So that's how most of us got started, is because somebody we knew was on it and people were saying, hey, you should be on Facebook and you're missing out. And so that's the thing, is just to go on and start slowly.
I was going to say, I agree with you about lurking. And as a blogger and a writer and a tweeter and a Facebooker, it is not necessarily always that often that I'll get comments, but then in-person conversations, maybe I go to the SHRM National Conference or I am having coffee with a friend. And that's when you really sort of find out in those in-person or verbal interactions that people are watching and listening. They aren't just commenting on your Facebook status update.
That happens to me all the time. I was getting my car worked on at a Toyota dealership, and I was complaining because it was taking so long. And then I had to pay extra. And so I just made that comment. No one said anything, but then I saw one of my friends maybe a week or so later, and they said, I have a mechanic you can go to. And don't go to the dealership anymore. I'm like, how did you know about that? Oh, I saw it on Facebook. Well, you didn't say anything. Oh, well, And I get that all the time. So people will see things and they won't write anything, but they'll comment later in person, or maybe they'll send you a text message.
Absolutely. Probably one of my first interactions on Twitter, and this was 2000 and I would say 9, and I had been on Twitter for probably a little over a year, and I was actually heading out to Toronto for my first HR conference, and I was in the Dallas airport, and a woman stopped me and asked me if I was blogging for jobs. And yes, I had a bag embroidered with my name on it and my Twitter name, and then my hair, it's kind of noticeable, the curly, crazy hair. And she stopped me to tell me that her son was also teething. Riley was just a baby at the time, and she had tried the frozen bagel that I was tweeting about, and it had worked for her.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
It's cool too when you walk up to people, or people walk up to you in conferences that you've never met before, and they know all about you because they've been following your tweets or they've seen something that you shared online.
The first time it happens, though, it's kind of creepy. I mean, you're like, how do I know you? And so I think for those HR professionals that are listening in, or recruiters or CEOs that are just getting on Twitter for the first time, it is important to know that people are listening, even if they aren't responding, and maybe you'll interact with them. So it is important for your employees and you to think through what you're tweeting or sharing before you actually do.
Right.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today's topic is Facebook, all things Facebook and social media, with my guest, Aaliyah Wright. You can connect with Aaliyah on Twitter at @1SHRM_scribe. That's 1SHRM scribe. And she's super active, shares lots of really great articles, insights, and is just a really great source for news in relation to social media, as well as all things HR and SHRM. Facebook recently announced that they're expanding their services and they'll be offering a workplace version of Facebook. Now, Facebook has been known in the past to have a bit of problems when it comes to things like privacy. And I wanted to ask you, Aaliyah, do you think that Facebook's past privacy blunders will impact adoption by organizations or those highly regulated industries?
Well, we really won't know for certain what this new enterprise version of Facebook will look like until it comes out. So I think it's too soon to pass judgment on it. That said, I think Facebook will try to alleviate and assuage those fears and has already done so by coming out with this new tool called Basics, which it unveiled, I think it was last month. I just saw the tutorial come up on my Facebook over the Thanksgiving weekend. They've also updated their privacy policy, and it shows users exactly what information it's collecting, how it's shared with advertisers. And you can Google Facebook Privacy Basics to see it. I think that we probably have to take a wait and see approach because this is going to be a new business model for them, and they want to make sure that people who have concerns about privacy and confidentiality, that those concerns are met.
I think that privacy concerns are really important. And I think a lot about Facebook and the information that it's gathering about me as a person. And now you add that to professional data. I think it's a little bit scary. And I don't think sometimes people realize the information that they're sharing and it's how it's being used. So I would encourage you as a listener to maybe try out a Facebook ad and just test it out, set one up, and then you can kind of see how they can target based on keyword or association or group and even age and also language. So you can really drill down the ads to really specific people, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. I can spend, $15 a day on an ad and you can only run it for 2 days. So you can either sponsor a post or do a right-hand side Facebook ad. So there's lots of different options, but I would recommend if you want to understand how Facebook is using your data, particularly for advertisers, maybe try it out for yourself.
That's very good advice. I think what creeps me out sometimes is when I'm typing a Gmail email to someone and then an ad pops up that has information contained in my email.
So that is a process called retargeting, right?
Right.
And we actually use some of that on Blogging for Jobs. We're doing some retargeting testing right now. So what happens is you visit a website. Like I've been on Nordstrom's looking at boots, those like riding boots, and black. I have a pair of brown already. And so everywhere on the internet, Nordstrom and the black riding boots are following me. And that is a process called retargeting. And I have a bunch of screenshots of recruiting and HR posts that are in different places of retargeting examples, because there'll be random HR technologies on like my favorite gossip blog that will be trying to sell me like a free download or a free trial for some SaaS-based product. It kind of makes me laugh a little bit.
Yeah, it's very scary. It's like that Tom Cruise movie that he was in, where he played this detective, where they sort of follow, like advertising would follow you everywhere, on the train, wherever you were. There would just be ads popping up depending on your usage of different things.
Minority Report?
Yeah, that's the movie.
Okay. All right.
It's one of those. And so a lot of the technology, actually that was in that movie, are things that we're seeing now. But it is interesting because advertisers are having a hard time targeting people or getting people to sit still to watch their ads, because we're all fast forwarding through television now, or we're not paying as much close attention, and sort of in newspapers. The decline of newspapers too has impacted advertising. So advertisers are being more creative.
They are being more creative, and like product placement is really common now. And I'll just mention, because this weekend has been kind of funny, because we watched the Macy's Day Parade, and we're taping this, and last weekend was Thanksgiving. So if you're listening in, this is a time in the future. So hello from the past to you. So we watched the Macy's Day Parade, and my daughter does not normally watch regular television, meaning that she basically watches Netflix. That's what she does with her iPad or on our regular television. And so she has not been exposed to children's toy advertisements on TV. And her reaction, like, she's so textbook. Some new toy will come up and her immediate response is, "Mom, I need this today." She is not she's not conditioned to ignore them. So every new toy advertisement is like Christmas morning and mom, these need to happen. I need to go to the store right now.
Wow.
So maybe there'll be a resurgence. It's slightly annoying, frankly. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't need 5 more toys. We have enough already. Let's get back to Facebook and some other social networks. I want to talk about other social networks outside of Facebook. We've talked a lot about Facebook, but there are thousands of other social networks that are out there. What are some of your favorites, or some that you mentioned and covered in the research of your book?
I'm still a big fan of TV Tag. It was called Get Glue. Have you used it before?
I don't watch a lot of television, so fill us in here.
Okay, so I use that for discussions about the TV shows and movies I watch. Mostly, so in addition to live tweeting The Walking Dead or lurking during Scandal, I'll peek at what people are saying about those and other shows on TV Tag. It's a fun way not to watch TV alone, and my son and I find it hilarious. I also use Google Plus, not a lot, but sometimes. I use LinkedIn daily. I couldn't do my job without it. There are so many ways to find information and to get alerts about industry goings on by using Boolean search strings on the site. It's also a great way to conduct interviews and make connections for sourcing for journalists. And it's a great way to generate conversations about your articles, too, and get follow-up story ideas. I use Twitter all the time in the same ways as well. I also use WhatsApp to stay in touch with family and friends, particularly when I travel outside of the country. I've used Tango as well. And WhatsApp and Tango are apps that are communication apps. But Tango it's almost like Skype, but it's sort of becoming it has sort of more of a social media feel to it, and Skype is trying to as well. I also, of course, use Instagram. I just started using Vine, but I was an active user on another platform called Vidi. It's a 15-second video platform, but it's shutting down now, and they're renaming it something else. So one of the other things that's really gaining steam are the vertical networks, the vertical social networks. And I wrote about this a little bit in the book, but they're starting to pick up a little bit more. And these are what we would know as niche networks. So, for example, there's one solely for doctors called Doximity, and you have to prove you are a working physician to join the site. And I'll be writing about these in the coming weeks, too. Of course, there's websites like GitHub for coders, Edmodo for teachers, parents, and students, and Spiceworks. They're helping people work and collaborate smarter and better. Spiceworks has 6 million IT professionals on it, and they help other IT professionals with advice and information. So we're seeing social media being used for a lot of reasons. People are going on first, not just to congregate and have conversations with their family and friends, but to find information and to learn from each other and collaborate as well.
There are a lot of different social networks, a lot of different things going on. And wow, some of these I wasn't even aware of. One that I really love for information is Quora, Quora. And it's good for like information and sharing. You're meeting with a different set of people than you would on Twitter or Facebook or other places.
Did you know that most of Quora's populace are from India?
Really?
Yes, a very high number of people who use the site are in India.
I use it to interact with the technology set, particularly Silicon Valley, because a lot of them post interesting things. And I've been doing some work in the technical recruiting side of things. And so I was looking for technical recruiters. And I have came across a number who use Quora particularly. So
I like it because there's lots of, I actually posed a question on it that got about 9,000 votes. The last time I checked, I was just asking about, should I let my 13-year-old use Facebook? And then so many people weighed in. It was overwhelming. I had to shut it off at one point because I think it was just one of those things where, and it's like we were saying, for you listeners, Quora is the website for questions. So you can pose questions on it and people, will share information based on your questions. So it's a really wonderful resource. If you're looking for information, personal or professional, people go on and ask, like, where's the best cheesesteak in Philadelphia, to the meaning of life. So there's all kinds of different ways to share there, too.
Do you have any other tips for listeners who are new to social networks and where maybe they can go out there and learn more about how they can use it, and more importantly, maybe how their employees and peers are using it, because sometimes I feel like we kind of live in this vacuum or void, and so we hear all these things about social networks and maybe they're evil, but we haven't necessarily tried it for ourselves.
Right. Well, they can follow me on Twitter at OneSharmScribe, or my Facebook fan page, which is I'm at Facebook, and it's Aaliyah Writes, and that's ALIAHWRITES. They can also join a network, follow the 991 rule, lurk, listen, and then jump in slowly. So, and then add their friends and family to social networks. Watch and see what other people do, or emulate, or don't emulate them. Start a LinkedIn page. And then if you go to my Facebook page, I'll be putting an article there again that details how to make the most of LinkedIn groups, which is a wonderful way to network. But I want your listeners to keep something in mind. The internet was new 25 years ago, and people were concerned about its use in the workplace. Now, it doesn't matter whether you work digging ditches or performing brain surgery. We cannot imagine not being able to access the internet for something during the course of our workday, whether it's getting directions or shopping online or looking up movie times or making reservations. Social media isn't going anywhere, and so we need to embrace it. But the easiest way to do that is to just jump in and start.
I want to let the listeners know, too, that we'll make sure and link to the Facebook or the LinkedIn group article that Aaliyah is mentioning over at Blogging for Jobs. So if you just go to bloggingforjobs.com and you put in Aaliyah Wright or OneSharmScribe or Twitter name in the right-hand sidebar of bloggingforjobs.com, it will pull up the podcast with all the list of resources and information. You know me, I like to be organized and help you guys make the best use of your time. I want to thank Aaliyah for joining us today. Is there any other way they can get a hold of you, or something we might have missed? Where can they go to buy your book?
The book is available on Amazon and also from the SHRM store. And if you go to shrm.org and just go to the SHRM store, you can find the book there. You can Google me. I'm on Google+. I am also on Facebook. That's Aaliyah Writes, ALIAHWRITES. I'm at Twitter at OneSharmScribe, and that's the number 1, SHRMSCRIBE. And you can also just reach out to me, across social media. I'm more than receptive, whether that's on LinkedIn, Google+, Facebook, or on Twitter.
She's got all the social networks covered. So thank you, Aaliyah, for joining us here today on the Workology podcast. Thank you to listening in today. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and today we've been discussing Facebook at work. The Workology podcast is a place where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all your favorite past episodes of Workology. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.
Production services for the Workology podcast